welcome. We're so happy you're here. I hope you enjoy every moment with us. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest updates and exclusive content. My name is Elliot, and if you had told me 10 years ago that I would one day sit down and speak openly about the parts of myself I once buried under lock and key, I would have laughed in your face, and then probably gone home and cried about it in private. That was the pattern back then. Public armor, private collapse. I grew up in a small town in the middle of nowhere, the kind of place where the same 3 families ran the same 3 businesses, where everyone knew your father's name before they knew yours, and where being different was not so much forbidden as it was simply unimaginable. My father worked at the mill, my mother taught 4th grade, and I was the only son, sandwiched between 2 older sisters who treated me like a doll when I was small and like a stranger when I got older. I mention my sisters first because they matter to the story, though not in the way you might expect. They were the first people in my life who ever put a dress on me, and they did it as a joke, and I laughed along with them because I was 5, and I did not yet understand that laughter can be a kind of camouflage. I remember standing in the hallway with a lace collar itching at my neck and looking at myself in the long mirror at the end of the hall, and I remember thinking very clearly that the person looking back at me made more sense than the person I saw in photographs. I did not have the language for that feeling. I was 5. I thought maybe everyone felt that way and simply did not talk about it, the way nobody talked about the fact that our neighbor drank too much or that the pastor's wife had left him for a woman from the next town over. There were many things people did not talk about where I grew up, and I learned early that silence was the price of belonging. So I put the dress back in my sister's closet, and I went outside and threw rocks at a tin can until my father called me in for supper, and I did not think about the mirror again for a very long time. Or rather, I thought about it constantly, but I did not let myself know that I was thinking about it. There is a particular skill you develop when you grow up hiding something from yourself, a way of noticing a feeling and immediately looking past it, the way you might notice a stain on the ceiling and then decide it is not worth the trouble of climbing a ladder to investigate. I became very good at that. Through elementary school, I was, by all outward measures, a normal boy. I played Little League badly. I collected baseball cards dutifully. I got into fights with a kid named Marcus over something neither of us could later remember, and I lost, and my father was disappointed, and I learned that disappointment was worse than pain because pain went away and disappointment settled into the walls of the house and never quite left. My mother was gentler. She read to me at night long past the age when other boys had stopped letting their mothers read to them, and I loved those hours more than I ever told her, because in the soft yellow light of my bedside lamp I could let my face do whatever it wanted to do, and she did not judge me for the softness that crept into it. She died when I was 11. Cancer, fast and merciless. I will not linger on it because grief is its own country, and I have been a citizen there long enough to know that describing it in detail does not honor it. But I will say that her death changed the shape of our house. My father, who had never been demonstrative, became something harder. My sisters, who had been on the verge of leaving anyway, left faster. And I, at 11, was suddenly the only child in a house that no longer felt like a home, with a father who did not know what to do with me, and a growing sense that whatever softness my mother had protected in me was now exposed to the weather. I started hiding things then in earnest. Not clothes, not yet. Just parts of myself. The way I liked to arrange the pencils on my desk by color rather than by length. The way I sometimes cried at commercials for laundry detergent because a mother in the ad reminded me of mine. The way I lingered too long at the makeup counter at the pharmacy when I was sent to pick up my father's blood pressure medication. Small things. Thread-like things. But threads, given enough time, weave into fabric, and fabric can be sewn into shape. Middle school was when I first understood that I was not, in fact, like the other boys, and that this was a problem I would need to solve. The other boys were beginning to talk about girls in a way that felt to me like a foreign language, and while I noticed girls too, my noticing was different. I did not want to be with them so much as I wanted to be them, or at least to move through the world the way they seemed to. I envied the ease with which my classmate Rebecca braided her hair before gym class. I envied the way Amanda's laugh could fill a whole cafeteria. I did not envy their bodies exactly, and I want to be careful here because the vocabulary around these things is fraught, and I do not want to speak for anyone but myself, but I envied their permission. They had permission to be soft, to be expressive, to cry when they were sad, and to hug when they were happy. I did not have that permission, and the wanting of it felt, at 13, like a shameful secret I would carry to my grave. It was around this time that I first put on a dress alone. My father was working a double shift at the mill, and my sisters were both away at college, and I found myself standing in front of my older sister's closet, which she had not yet emptied out, and I took down a simple blue dress with a white collar and I put it on, and I sat on the edge of her bed for what must have been an hour, just breathing. I did not look at the mirror. I was afraid of what the mirror would tell me. I did not know if I wanted it to tell me that I looked ridiculous or that I looked right, and I was not ready for either answer. When I finally did look, I did not cry, though I had expected to. Instead, I felt a kind of quiet recognition, the way you feel when you finally remember the name of a song that has been stuck in your head for days. Oh, I thought, there you are. I hung the dress back up. I straightened the sheets. I went downstairs and made myself a sandwich and watched television until my father came home, and when he asked me how my day had been, I said fine, and I meant it because for the first time in a long time, something inside me had shifted from a knot into a thread I could follow. But I did not follow it. Not then. I was 13, and I was afraid, and fear is a very effective jailer. Instead, I doubled down on the performance of being the son my father wanted. I joined the wrestling team, which I hated. I stopped reading the novels my mother had loved, and I started reading the war histories my father kept on the shelf above the television. I let my voice deepen when I could have let it stay light. I learned to walk with my shoulders back and my chin forward, and I learned that if you occupy space aggressively enough, people will stop looking at you closely because closeness is a kind of intimacy and aggression discourages intimacy. This is the first real lesson I want to pass on to anyone listening. When you hide from yourself, you also hide from everyone who might love you. You cannot be selective about it. The armor that keeps out the people you fear also keeps out the people you need. I did not understand this at 13, or at 15, or at 18 when I graduated high school and left for a state university 2 hours away, telling my father I wanted to study engineering, which was a lie, because what I actually wanted was to be somewhere no one knew me. College is often described as a place of self-discovery, and I suppose in some ways it was for me, though not in the ways the brochures promised. I did not join clubs. I did not make deep friendships. I lived in a single dorm room on the 3rd floor of the oldest building on campus, and I studied hard enough to keep my scholarship, and I worked evenings at the campus bookstore, and I spent every weekend alone. But alone, for the first time in my life, meant something different. Alone meant a door I could lock. Alone meant a small closet I could fill with things that were mine and mine alone and no one else needed to know. It began modestly. A pair of women's jeans I bought at a thrift store 2 towns over, telling the cashier they were for my girlfriend. A soft cardigan I found at a rummage sale, folded and hidden in a shoebox at the back of my closet. A tube of lipstick, terrible drugstore red, which I bought at a gas station at 2 in the morning because I could not bear the thought of anyone I might know seeing me hold it. Each acquisition was preceded by weeks of internal debate, and each was followed by a wave of shame so total it left me hollow for days. But the shame did not stop me. That is the thing about hunger. Shame slows it down, but it does not extinguish it. And what I was experiencing, I came slowly to understand, was hunger. Not for the clothes themselves, though I did love the way certain fabrics felt against my skin, but for the self that emerged when I wore them. That self was quieter than the one I performed all day. She was more attentive. She noticed things. She wanted to be kind. She wanted to be seen. And in the small bright island of my dorm room, with the door locked and the blinds drawn, she was allowed to exist for an hour or 2 before I put her back in the shoebox and became, once again, the boy I had been trained to be. I want to be honest about the darker turns this took, because sanitizing it would be a disservice to anyone struggling with similar feelings. In my sophomore year, I began to hate myself in a way that felt organized. Not the diffuse teenage self-loathing I had known before, but a targeted, structured hatred, with rules and rituals. I would allow myself 1 evening a week in the clothes, and if I broke the rule and indulged twice, I would punish myself by refusing to eat the next day. I would look at myself in the mirror in the cardigan and the jeans and the terrible lipstick, and I would whisper cruel things at my reflection, things I would never have said to another human being, things I had heard men in my hometown say about people they suspected of being like me. I told myself I was disgusting. I told myself my mother would have been ashamed. That last one was the worst, because I had no way of knowing whether it was true, and the uncertainty of it was itself a kind of torture. And then, on a Tuesday in October of my junior year, I decided I was going to hurt someone. This is the part of the story that surprises people. They expect the arc to bend cleanly toward acceptance, toward liberation, toward the affirming embrace of a chosen family. And it does, eventually. But first it bent somewhere much uglier, and I think that ugliness matters, because it is where I met the version of myself I had to forgive before I could become anyone else. There was a boy on my floor named Trevor. He was, in every way I could measure, the person I had been trained to want to be. Broad-shouldered, easy smiling, dating a pretty girl from the sorority across the quad, majoring in business, headed for a comfortable life in a comfortable city. He was not cruel to me. He was not anything to me, really. He said hello in the hallway. He borrowed my stapler once. But I hated him with a specificity that scared me because I understood, even in the moment of hating him, that what I was hating was not Trevor at all. It was the ease of him. It was the way the world had opened itself up to him without asking him to prove anything, while I felt I had to prove something every hour of every day just to be allowed to keep breathing. And so I began to plan a revenge that had nothing to do with him. That is the strange arithmetic of displaced pain. You cannot punish the world, so you pick a stand-in. I told myself I was going to expose him. I convinced myself, through the elaborate logic that resentment always builds for itself, that he must be hiding something too, that no one could be that comfortable in their own skin without a secret rotting somewhere underneath. I started paying attention to him, watching when he came and went, noticing which parties he attended and which he skipped. I told myself I was building a case, though I could not have said, if pressed, what the case was for. It went on for weeks. I lost weight I could not afford to lose. I stopped going to 2 of my classes. I sat at my desk at night with a notebook full of observations about a person I had never actually spoken to for more than 30 seconds, and I told myself this was justice, this was clarity, this was the beginning of my getting even with a world that had told me I was wrong for existing. And then, on a Thursday night in November, I was walking back to my dorm from the library, and I saw Trevor sitting on the stone bench outside our building, alone, crying. Not performing sadness. Not the artful melancholy that some people wear like a coat. Just crying, the way a person cries when they think no one is watching, ugly and shoulder-shaking and unbeautiful. I stopped. I did not mean to stop. My body stopped before my mind caught up to it. And I stood there in the cold with my breath visible in the air, watching this person I had convinced myself was my enemy fall apart in a way I recognized down to the marrow of my bones. I did not go to him. I want to be clear about that. I did not have some cinematic reconciliation on a stone bench in November. I turned around and I walked the long way back to my building, and I went up to my room and I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time in the dark, and I understood for the first time in my adult life that the person I had been trying to destroy was myself. Trevor was fine, eventually. His father had died that night, I later learned, though I never spoke to him about it. Life moved him along, as life does. But I was not fine, and I could no longer pretend to be, because you cannot look at another human being's grief and use it as a mirror for your own without something breaking open inside you. What broke open that night was the notebook. I took it out of my desk, and I read through it, page by page, and I saw myself for what I had become, which was a person nursing a grievance so old and so private that I had begun to poison strangers with it. I burned the notebook in the sink. It was a stupid, dramatic thing to do, and I set off the smoke alarm, and my resident advisor knocked on my door with a look of genuine alarm, and I told her I had been trying to light a candle, which was such an obvious lie that she must have known it was one, but she let it pass. Kindnesses like that are rare in the world, and I have tried, in the years since, to pay them forward whenever I can. The next morning I called the counseling center on campus and made an appointment. It took another 3 weeks before I actually went. Fear is patient. But I went, eventually, and I sat across from a woman named Dr. On who did not flinch when I told her, in a voice so small I could barely hear myself, that I sometimes wore women's clothes in my dorm room, and that I was not sure whether I wanted to be a woman or whether I just wanted to stop being a man in the specific way I had been taught to be one. She did not tell me what I was. That is the first thing I want to say about her, and it is why I still think of her as one of the great teachers of my life. She did not hand me a label and send me on my way. She asked me questions. She asked what the clothes made me feel. She asked what my mother had been like. She asked whether I had ever been able to cry in front of another person, and when I said no, she asked whether I would like to try, and when I said I did not know how, she said that was all right, that we could sit together in the not knowing for as long as I needed to. I saw her every week for the rest of college. I did not come out to my father. I did not come out to my sisters. I did not, in any public sense, become anyone new. But something inside me was slowly, cautiously, being unclenched, and by the time I graduated with a degree in engineering I did not particularly want, I had begun to believe that I might be allowed, someday, to have a life that felt like mine. I took a job in a mid-sized city, 300 miles from where I had grown up. I chose the city partly because it was far, and partly because it was large enough that I could disappear into it. I rented a small apartment on the second floor of a converted warehouse. I bought a bed and a table and 2 chairs, and for the first month I did nothing else because for the first time in my life I had a home that no one else had ever set foot in, and I wanted to sit with that feeling for a while before I filled it up with anything. Then, slowly I began to build. Not a wardrobe, though that came too. I began to build a self. I found a therapist in the city, a soft-spoken man named Miguel, who had been recommended by Dr. On, and I continued the work I had begun in college. I joined a support group that met on Wednesday nights in the basement of a church, and though I was terrified the first time I went, and though I sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes before I could make myself walk inside, I found there a room full of people who had been, in one way or another, where I was. Some of them were transitioning. Some of them had transitioned years ago, and were living quietly ordinary lives. Some of them, like me at that time, were still figuring out what the shape of their identity even was. There was a woman named Denise who had transitioned in her 50s after a 30-year marriage and who spoke about her wife with a tenderness that made me understand, for the first time, that love and honesty were not enemies. There was a man named Kwame who was not transitioning at all, who simply liked to wear dresses on the weekends and who had no interest in being called a woman, and who had been happily married to a woman who had no interest in being called anything other than his wife for 11 years. There was a young person named Sam, barely 20, who was in the middle of a legal name change, and who cried through half of every meeting and laughed through the other half. What I learned from them, cumulatively and slowly, was that identity is not a costume you put on or take off, and it is not a destination you arrive at. It is a conversation you have with yourself over and over again for the rest of your life, and the goal is not to end the conversation but to have it honestly. This was the most freeing idea I had ever encountered. It meant I did not have to know right now exactly who or what I was. It meant I could try things and change my mind and try other things and gradually settle into something that felt like home without ever having to declare, once and for all, that I had reached it. I began, then, to experiment more openly. I let my hair grow. I bought clothes that I actually chose for myself, rather than clothes I bought in secret and shame. I wore what I wanted to wear in my apartment and then on my balcony, and then one Saturday afternoon that felt as momentous as any wedding on a walk around my block. Nothing happened. That is what I remember most clearly. Nothing happened. A woman walked her dog past me and smiled the way people smile at strangers on sidewalks. A child on a scooter zipped by, without giving me a second look. A man watering his plants on his front stoop nodded at me the way neighbors nod at neighbors. The world, which I had spent my entire life imagining as a jury waiting to convict me, was mostly just busy with its own errands. I want to be careful here, because I know this is not everyone's experience. There are places in this country, and in this world where the walk I took that Saturday would not have ended so uneventfully, and I do not want to pretend otherwise. I was lucky in my geography, and I was lucky in my body, which passed easily enough that most passers-by did not have to think about how to categorize me, and I was lucky in 1,000 other small ways that other people are not lucky in. But I mention the ordinariness of that afternoon because I think it is important for anyone at the beginning of this journey to know that the catastrophes we imagine are almost always larger than the ones we actually encounter. The mind, when it has been trained to expect danger, will manufacture danger where none exists. Part of healing is learning to distinguish between the two. Not all of my walks were uneventful. There was a night, about a year in, when a man on a train platform said something to me that I will not repeat, and I felt the old shame rise up like a tide, and I went home and sat on my bathroom floor and wept in a way I had not wept since my mother died. I called Miguel the next morning, and he saw me that afternoon, and he asked me a question I have thought about many times since. He asked whether the man on the platform had told me something I did not already believe about myself, or whether he had simply given voice to a belief I had been carrying for years. I sat with that for a long time, and I realized that the reason the man's words had hurt so much was not that they were new to me, but that they were old, that they were the same words I had whispered at my reflection in that dorm room, that they had been living inside me for so long that when a stranger spoke them out loud it felt like a betrayal from within my own house. The work, then, was not to convince the world to stop saying those words. That was a fight I would lose. The work was to stop believing them myself, so that when I encountered them in the wild, they would land on ground that could not receive them. This is not an easy work, and I will not pretend I have completed it. There are still days when a passing comment can undo me. There are still mornings when I look in the mirror and hear my father's voice, though my father, to his credit, never actually said the things I imagine him saying. But the work has gotten easier over the years, and the ground inside me has grown, if not entirely unreceptive to cruelty, at least harder to till. I want to say something about my father, because he is the axis around which much of my fear turned, and because the story of how we came to understand each other is, I think, the truest part of this whole account. I did not come out to him for 6 years after I left home. I visited him 3 or 4 times a year, always in what I thought of as my old costume, and each visit was a small death, because I would arrive at his door in clothes I had not worn in months, and immediately feel my body remember how to occupy space defensively, and I would sit at his kitchen table and eat the same beef stew he had made for me since I was a child, and I would talk about my job and the weather and the neighbors, and I would leave 2 days later feeling like I had betrayed the person I had spent so much effort becoming. I told Miguel about this, and he did not tell me to come out to my father. Miguel almost never told me to do anything. He asked me what I was afraid of, and I said I was afraid my father would reject me, and he asked me what rejection would actually look like, in concrete terms, and I said I was afraid he would tell me never to come home again. And Miguel asked me a question that I have carried with me ever since. He asked whether I was already living as though that had happened. I had to sit with that for weeks, and I realized that I was. I was already living as though my father had rejected me. I had already made myself into a stranger in his kitchen. I had already erased, on my own initiative, the person I was becoming in order to preempt a rejection that had not actually occurred. The rejection I feared was already, in some functional sense, the life I was living. I flew home the following month. I did not tell my father in advance what I wanted to talk about. I arrived on a Friday evening, and we ate his beef stew, and I helped him with the dishes, and afterward we sat on his back porch in the late summer air, and I told him, in a voice that shook so badly I could barely form the words, that there was something I had been keeping from him for a very long time. He listened. That is what I remember. He did not interrupt. He did not ask questions. He did not, as I had rehearsed 1,000 times in my mind, stand up and walk away. He listened, and when I was finished, he was quiet for a long time, and then he said, in a voice I had never heard from him before, that he had wondered. He had wondered since I was a child. He had wondered when he found the dress in my sister's closet folded the wrong way that summer I was 13. He had wondered when he saw the way I looked at my mother when she brushed her hair. He had wondered, and he had not known what to do with the wondering, and he had done what men of his generation had been taught to do, which was to say nothing and hope the wondering would resolve itself. He said he was sorry he had not been braver. He said he was sorry my mother had not lived to see me become whoever I was becoming, because he thought she would have known what to say, and he did not. He said he did not fully understand what I was telling him, but he did not need to understand it in order to love me, and that if I would be patient with him, he would try. I did not expect any of that. I had prepared myself for anger. I had prepared myself for grief. I had prepared myself for a long silence and a longer estrangement. I had not prepared myself for the possibility that my father, at 67 years old, would surprise me. This is another lesson I would like to pass on, gently, to anyone listening. The people in your life may be more capable of love than the frightened version of you can allow itself to believe. This is not always true. There are parents who will not surprise you in the ways mine did, and I do not want to sell false hope. But some will. And even those who cannot meet you where you are in the moment may, given time and patience, find their way closer than you thought possible. Do not write anyone off in advance. Do not perform their rejection for them. Let them show you who they actually are, and give them, when you can, the same grace you are asking them to give you. My father died 4 years after that conversation. He had a stroke on a Tuesday morning, and he was gone by Wednesday night, and in the days between, he was mostly not conscious, but there was one lucid hour in which he held my hand and told me he was proud of me, and that was the last full sentence he ever spoke to anyone. I do not tell that story to be sentimental. I tell it because for years I had believed that my father's love was conditional on my being someone I was not, and I had built my entire adult life around either meeting or fleeing that condition, and it turned out, in the end, that the condition had never existed. It had only ever existed inside my own head. I had spent decades running from a wall that had never been there. I am not fully transitioned in the medical sense. I want to say this because there is often an assumption in stories like mine that the arc ends with a particular set of procedures and a particular declaration of identity, and I do not want to reinforce that assumption. Some people transition fully and find great peace in it. Some people transition partially. Some people, like me, live in a space that does not map neatly onto any of the available categories, and we make our peace with the ambiguity because the ambiguity is the truth of who we are. I use a name that is not the name my parents gave me, but I have not legally changed it. I dress, most days, in a way that would probably read as feminine to a stranger, but I have not pursued hormones, and I may never. I answer to different pronouns from different people, and I do not correct my few remaining relatives from my hometown when they use the pronouns they have used my whole life, because I understand that language is a slow-moving river, and I am not in a hurry to force anyone into its current before they are ready. What I have at 41 is not a completed identity. What I have is a life. A modest, ordinary life. With a partner named Rosa, whom I met at a bookstore reading 3 years ago, and who loves me in a way I did not know I would be allowed to be loved. A job I actually enjoy, teaching mathematics at a community college, where I get to watch young people struggle with the same equations I once struggled with and to tell them, honestly, that struggling is not the same as failing. A small apartment full of books and plants and the accumulated evidence of a person who is allowed, eventually, to choose her own furniture. A weekly phone call with my older sister, who came around to who I am more slowly than my father did, but who has arrived, and who now sends me birthday cards addressed to the name I use. A therapist I still see, though only once a month now. A support group where I am no longer the youngest person in the room, and where I have begun in small ways to be the person that Denise and Kwame and Sam once were for me. If you are watching this and you recognize something of yourself in what I have described, I want to say a few things directly to you. The first is that you are not disgusting. Whatever it is inside you that is asking to be seen, it is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that something is asking to be understood, and understanding takes time, and time is something you are allowed to give yourself. The second is that revenge, in any of the forms it may present itself, is a trap. I know because I built one and I climbed into it. Whatever pain the world has caused you, the answer to that pain is not to become someone who causes more of it. The people who hurt you, whether by design or by accident, are not made smaller by your becoming smaller too. The only meaningful revenge, if you must call it that, is to build a life that could not have existed under the terms they set for you. And even that is not really revenge. It is just living. The third is that you do not have to know, right now, what you are. You do not have to declare yourself. You do not have to fit into a category before you are allowed to begin the work of being kind to yourself. Kindness is the prerequisite, not the reward. Start there and see what unfolds. The fourth is that the people you are most afraid of losing may be more capable of loving you than you think, and the people who genuinely cannot love the real you were never really loving you in the first place. Both of these facts are hard, but both of them are true, and living in accordance with them is, in my experience, the beginning of freedom. The fifth is that there is no shame in getting help. I would not be alive without Dr. On, and I would not be well without Miguel, and I would not be the version of myself I am today without the strangers in the basement of that church who let me sit quietly at the back of the room for 2 months before I ever spoke a word. Asking for help is not a weakness. It is the most adult thing you will ever do. The sixth and the last is that identity is not a solo journey, no matter how alone you feel inside it. Somewhere, in some room, on some Wednesday night, in some quiet corner of the internet, or in some small nod exchanged with a stranger on a train platform, there are people who have walked at least part of the road you are on, and they are waiting to walk the next stretch with you. Find them. Let them find you. Do not spend, as I did, so many years imagining yourself as the only one. I titled this story, when I began recording it, with a phrase about revenge because it is the truth of where I began. I did want revenge. I wanted it against a world that had told me I was wrong, against a boy on my floor who had done nothing to deserve my hatred, against a version of my father that had never really existed, against my own body for being the wrong size and the wrong shape, against my mother for having the audacity to die before she could tell me who I was allowed to be. I wanted revenge, and instead I got a life, and the life turned out to be so much larger and stranger and gentler than the revenge ever could have been. That is not a trade I would have understood at 20. I offer it to you now in case there is something in it that helps you understand your own trade a little more clearly. There is one more thing I want to say, and then I will let you go. Somewhere in the middle of all of this, I stopped keeping the shoebox at the back of my closet. I do not remember the exact day. It happened gradually the way most important things happen. One morning I noticed that the clothes I had once hidden had migrated, one garment at a time, into the main body of my wardrobe, and that the box itself was empty, and that I had been using it, without noticing, to store old receipts. I threw the box away. It felt like nothing at the time, and it feels like everything now. The parts of ourselves that we hide are not diminished by hiding. They wait. They are patient. They will keep waiting for as long as it takes, and when we are finally ready to bring them into the light, they will not be angry with us for having taken so long. They will simply be relieved, the way anyone is relieved to be allowed, at last, into the warmth of the house. Bring yourself into the warmth of the house. Whoever you are, whatever name you are still trying on, whatever version of your own reflection has been waiting in some quiet mirror for you to look at it honestly, bring yourself in. The door is not as heavy as you think, and the people already inside, some of whom you have not met yet, have been keeping a chair for you at the table this whole time. Thank you for watching and spending this time with me. If this story helped you understand yourself or others a little better, feel free to explore more on the channel.